I am Jane Harmon, President, Director, and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson Center, and it is my pleasure, real pleasure, to welcome you here today as Nabeel Rajab of Bahrain is honored with the Ian Ratiu Democracy Award. Over the past 6 years, this award ceremony has become an important event in Washington and surely a cherished event at the Wilson Center. It seeks to bring visibility and international recognition to the ideas and accomplishments of individuals who are working on behalf of democracy and human rights. And this workshop, the centerpiece of the award, also strives to enrich the intellectual environment in which ideas about democracy and democratic change circulate, both within and beyond Washington. Organized in cooperation with the Ratiu Democracy Center in Turda, Romania, this event expresses the deep commitment to democracy of the late Ian Ratiu through his contributions as a Romanian politician and intellectual, as well as his interest in democratic change worldwide. Past awardees include Egyptian democracy activist Saad Ibrahim, Anatoly Mikhailov of Belarus, Polish intellectual and editor Adam Michnik, and Russian blogger and activist Oleg Kozlovsky. Oleg, last year's awardee, is with us today, and he came all the way from Moscow just to be here. Oleg, would you stand up, please? There he is. I think we should give you a seat at the table, isn't there? Come on now. Let's find a seat here. As a woman who came of age during America's own turbulent march toward civil and voting rights, my passion for these issues was burned into my DNA long ago. I served as Secretary to the Cabinet for President Jimmy Carter, perhaps the first American president to make human rights the centerpiece of his administration's foreign policy. As a member of Congress for 17 years, I was part of the Human Rights Caucus, along with my beloved late friend and colleague Tom Lantos, and I joined that caucus on the day I was sworn into Congress in 1993. I was in Beijing in 1995 when then First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton told the world that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. It was quite candidly one of the most exhilarating moments of my life, and how thrilling it is to see her as Secretary of State in Myanmar this week, meeting with the iconic Aung San Suu Kyi. I can never say that word. At any rate, Aung San Suu Kyi. It's a thrilling thing to see our Secretary of State in the first visit in a half century to that country, which has been a huge violator of human rights. I know that you have just finished a terrific panel on Arab youth with Robin Wright, Roy Gutman, and Carol Murphy. Where is Carol Murphy? Is she still here? She was at our lunch, too. Three of the finest journalists and Middle East experts we have in this country. Both Robin and Carol are current scholars here at the center. Wafa Ali, also from Bahrain, will be on a later panel. She is currently one of our Middle East journalists in residence and brings an added Bahraini perspective to this discussion. And so, we have gathered today to honor Nabeel Rajab, one of Bahrain's leading human rights activists. One of the founders of the human rights movement in Bahrain, he is the president of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights and director of the newly established Gulf Center for Human Rights. He's also on the board of advisors for the Middle East and North Africa Division of Human Rights Watch, a marvelous organization, and a member of an Arab media monitoring group. He is the recipient of the Distinguished Silbury Prize to facilitate his ongoing humanitarian and human rights work. In such tumultuous times, Nabeel Rajab's efforts to advance democratic freedoms for Bahraini citizens peacefully, even in the face of considerable personal peril, are truly exemplary. This award could not be timelier. The violent crackdown on the peaceful protests in Bahrain earlier this year and the ensuing arrests and prosecutions of doctors and others have to some extent been overshadowed by events in Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, and Syria. I was in Tunisia for the elections a few weeks ago. with the National Democratic Institute and was inspired by the free and transparent process. But elsewhere, including in Bahrain, developments have been far less encouraging. Bahrain is a strategic partner of the United States in the Gulf region, and the domestic turmoil there has put the U.S. in a difficult position. In recent days, the situation in Bahrain has very much come into focus as pressure on intellectuals, doctors, and opposition members has continued. The government-sponsored Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry released a report on November 23rd, just a couple weeks ago, on the violent suppression of the unrest. The report described the, quote, use of excessive force by police officers, as well as, quote, a systematic practice of physical and psychological mistreatment, which in many cases amounted to torture and sometimes death. In his response to the report, King Hamad said that his government is determined to ensure that the painful events our beloved nation has just experienced are not repeated, but that we learn from them, unquote. But this action hasn't satisfied everyone. Several Bahraini-based human rights groups, including Nabeel's, also issued a report last week entitled Bahrain, the Human Price for Freedom and Justice. It argues that the Bahraini government is only interested in plastering over the cracks in its international reputation and not addressing the long-standing systemic problems which led to the violations witnessed during 2011. We hope that today's discussions can contribute to not just a dialogue, which is something we always embrace at the Wilson Center, but a path forward. We want to encourage reform in Bahrain. And finally, a few thanks are in order. Thank you and welcome back to the Wilson Center to Carl Gershman, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, one of our best government and, I guess, privately funded, too, groups, and a group which sponsors both the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute. IRI and NDI are two of the great builders of political capacity around the world. And thanks to Tom Malinowski, the Washington Director of Human Rights Watch, a marvelous organization. Always thanks to the supremely capable Christian Osterman. Where is he? Oh, he's right there, all dressed up, who, as head of our European Studies Department, will moderate today's discussion. He has chaired the Ratiu Award for the past 6 years and developed it into a landmark event. And in closing, of course, we profoundly thank the Ratiu family, represented here by Eon's sons, Nikolai and Andrei. We are grateful to them and the Ratiu Family Charitable Foundation for support of this important event. Nikolai, as president of the foundation, will present Najib with the Ian Ratiu Democracy Award during the reception following this workshop. Meanwhile, now it is my great pleasure to congratulate and give the floor to Nabeel Rajab, the 2011 Ian Ratiu Democracy Award recipient. Congratulations.
Should I start speaking?
Yeah, wherever you want.
My turn?
It's your turn.
All right. Well, I'm happy to, is it working?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to talk today for, I think, the fourth time. And if any of you have heard me more than once, I'm sorry for being bored. And thanks for inviting me here. Thanks for the Wilson Center for the great job. And thanks for Ratiu family who are behind this event, who are behind the award. And I think this is an important opportunity to highlight the human rights violation committed in our region. In my country, Bahrain, it is an opportunity to strengthen and support all the democratic movement, all the struggle of those people fighting for democracy, human rights, and social justice in my country and in the whole region. It is an opportunity that needs to be really appreciated. chance to come and speak all the way in front of very important people like you, a chance that I don't get in my own home country. And I come from a place, even tweeting in Twitter is a crime. I've been interrogated at least a couple of times in the past 1 month or past 2 months because of my Twitter account, and once because by the military prosecutor, and the second time by the public prosecutor. Anyway, thanks one more time. In fact, the Ratiu have made a lot of Bahrainis go and find out about Romania more and more, and about the Ratiu family and the late father Ayn Ratiu, because someone, a businessman from Romania, awards some human rights activist in Bahrain. That made a lot of people try to find out where is Romania and what is all Ratiu about. And I think that has brought both the nation closer to each other, as we here also in Wilson Center. It's a great job, and I thank you for inviting me here, giving me the chance to speak. Thanks for all the human rights organizations that I could see some of their faces here, like Human Rights Watch, who've been doing an excellent job on Bahrain in the past month and years. And especially Joe Stork, I could see his face, that I just discovered 2 nights ago that he cooks good food, because I had dinner in his house. And also Brian Doley, who've been doing excellent job for the for Human Rights First. And I hope there are, I'm not missing name, because I'm not wearing my glasses. That's what I see now. Thanks for all those people who have given their life in my country, in the whole region, for me to be known by you here. It's not me, it's the struggle of many people who were killed in the region, in Bahrain, in the Gulf region, in Tunisia, in Egypt, who made unknown people, simple people like me, to be known. Thanks for those people. I salute those people in my country, those mothers who gave their children life for the struggle, for the fight to achieve democracy and social justice. Thanks for Bouazizi, whom without him, none of us, none of our struggle will be known. Bouazizi, when the street vendor who fired himself, and we have witnessed a tsunami in the region of change. That shows the hunger of our people for democracy and social justice. An experience that we have not witnessed in our region. A tsunami that is not going to stop. It's going to continue. The region they're going to change. In less than 10 years' time, I assume the whole region is going to change. People will have their freedom and will live in better life. Those government who are taking lessons from other government, they should learn and cope with the situation and change themselves towards democracy and social justice, or there'll be the time coming soon that they will be changed from their seats. After Bouazizi, of course, he has made the formula is very simple for us. Is meet in the Facebook and date in the Twitter and go out in the street. It's a social media. Thanks for the social media, which worked very much as an ally. We didn't have ally among the superpower, among the Western countries. We didn't have. We are from a region that we are from a country that does not respect freedom of expression. We consider to be, according to Reporter Without Border, we number 143 out of 170 countries. That's where we categorize on the freedom of expression. Journalists are banned from Bahrain, and blogs and websites are being blocked. The website where I'm operating from, Bahrain Center for Human Rights, is blocked in my country, and I could see it here, but I cannot see it in my country. But we have a new tool that we have been using, thanks to those experts who discovered those tools and those engines, things like called social media, which played, I think, an excellent role as an ally. Social media, which brought the young movement, young generation, from listening to the elite to leading the elite in our region. That's why we see our revolution is We will say our revolution is a young people revolution. A lot of people says that they call it Arab Spring. They call our revolution or uprising Arab Spring. But is it Arab Spring? Because once they say Arab Spring, you know that they are comparing it what happened in Bahrain and in the region to what happened in Eastern Europe. Yes, it was maybe similar in terms of the hunger of people for democracy. Yes, in the speed of the snowballing effect. And yes, we got benefit of the complication of the regional and Western situation. But we were different because, as I repeat, we were not a revolution that led by elite, but we were a revolution where elite were led by youth people. We did not have the same support Eastern European country at the time had from the European Union, from United States, due to their relation with Russia. Instead we have the Arab League, which is I would call it a club of dictators, which is resisting any changes, resisting any the struggle of the young people in the country. We have that fallen Russia at that time, weak and fallen Russia, versus we have the Arab League. And of course, everybody have witnessed that the ability of those countries in our region to live longer is much more than what we have seen in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, there were collapse of country by country, but in our region, what we have seen is that the country fall, the second country try to resist more and more and kill more people, and this is the same thing we have seen after in Libya and Yemen and Syria as well. Bahrain government, as you know, depend mainly on the PR companies, and wherever I go anywhere, I see PR companies behind me in any meetings, in any talks that I do. I hope none of them are here now. And restrict freedom of expression, so nothing can go out except the social media that we have in Bahrain. And I think social media were an ally for our struggle. And we consider today, because of the Arab uprising, maybe one of the most active nation in the whole Arab region in terms of the use of social media. As I said, our population, Bahraini population, is something like 600,000 people, and my own follower on Facebook and Twitter, something like 130,000 people, almost getting to quarter of the. And that shows means ability to influence. And although we don't have a newspaper, yes, we don't have TV, yes, we don't have that, but now today we have a social media, and that's why it keeps us going. Although the crackdown have killed many people in my country, we have not got it as the Tunisian and as the Egyptian as fast as they've done. But it has taken much longer time with us. But I think what keeps us still going, it is the social media. It keeps us connected. It keeps us influential among our people. That's why Bahrain government maybe did not react like Egypt. As you know that Tunisian government, what they have done, they shut down the Facebook and Twitter to fight the revolution back. But the Egyptian were maybe smarter. They said, no, we'll not shut down the Facebook and Twitter, but we'll shut down the whole internet. And they shut down at the time of the revolution the whole internet. And Bahrain government thought of a smarter way, so that we don't want the outside world to say that we are violating human rights. So let everything work, but target every human right, every activist in the internet and put him in jail. And this is what happened. Hundreds of people were targeted. Hundreds of people were systematically tortured, fired from home, their houses being raided, their area, villages being attacked, their mosque being demolished. they're systematically tortured. Many of them taken, transferred to hospital. At least one of them were tortured to death because of their work on the social media. As you know, all these countries that we have in the Gulf, we didn't expect any of the government to leave so easy and given power and we knew that everybody will have a strong ally. And who will be the strongest ally for those government are member of those family, of their family. So we have seen the Al-Qaddafi of Libya and his son, and he was the great help with the army of security that attacking the protesters in the street. We have seen the brother of Al-Assad killing people in the street. We have seen also the son of Saleh of Yemen, how it's been. I mean, even Tunisian, we realized later that the wife, family of Tunisian president, she and her family owns the biggest economic and security cartel in Tunisia. They were involved in all oppression. They were involved in all killing. A report that we have documented in Bahrain Center for Human Rights, that even the members of ruling family, they were committing crimes. They were involved in torture. They were involved in stopping people in checkpoints. Two sons of the king, Sheikh Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa and Sheikh Khalid bin Hamad Al Khalifa, they were, by their own hand, they were torturing people. And the Sheikh Khalifa bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, I don't know, many of you have seen the report which was issued by Basuni Committee, where we thought this man going to be taken before justice, but instead, unfortunately, the government have awarded him a better job and put him in to head the Security Council. Many incidents were Noura Al Khalifa. Noura, she's a woman. She was known to be torturing women, and she was using electrocution against the doctors and the nurses. And so this is something unexpected, that the ruling family will be involved to that close extent, that to commit by themselves commit all this violation. Bahrain maybe has something which we have not witnessed in the other country in the revolution, where Bahrain is the only country where hospitals were used as a torturing center. And maybe Joe later or Brian are here could elaborate on that. People were taken to hospital because they were shot in the street and wounded. And then the army have captured, the Bahraini army along with the Gulf and Saudi and the Emirati, they've captured or they've taken the hospital and they make it a military hospital. There were tens of wounded people in the hospital at the time. People were badly tortured in the theater room, in the operation room, in the ICU. And the whole sixth floor of the only hospital we have turned to be an interrogation center where many people were interrogated. Also, one of the phenomenon that we had, maybe other countries didn't have, is the targeting medics, targeting doctors, targeting nurses. Maybe it's the only country had a revolution in the past days, and months and years, that targeted a huge group of medics and doctors, torturing them, electrocuting them, hanging them, beating them, kicking them, blindfolding them. So what happened to the medics, you could write books about it. Just if you have a look at the website of Physicians for Human Rights and Doctors Without Borders, that will give you a lot of information about what has happened against the medics. Collective punishment is something we were also collective, because in Bahrain, as you know, that the majority of the Bahrainis are from Shia background, and majority of the protesters are Shias. So what happened is the government start targeting people based on sectarian background. Thousands of people were fired from home. No less than 6% of the population, 6% of the manpower were either fired or were suspended based on their sectarian background. Many of them left the country, some of them in the United States, some of them in Europe, some of them. Their mosques were demolished for no reason. I don't know what that got to do with the political demand of the people. Nightly shows, nightly program on TV to insult the population, Shia population. Checkpoints were set up in roads and in the street to stop people, humiliate them, beat them in the street. Thousands of houses were robbed. Millions of dinars and dollars were taken by those security. They were instructed, any house that you reach, any house that you go, that you should, whatever you see is you can take it, not you can break it. You can see hundreds of videos, hundreds if it is not thousands of videos we have uploaded that shows how much those army of the Bahrain and of the GCC are breaking car in the street and stealing what is inside the cars. Human rights activists were a target in Bahrain, and as you know, many people. Maybe earlier, Mr. Roy Gottman was asking me why I'm the only one who are not yet arrested, and I think I'm the luckiest man, because most of my colleagues who are working with me, they are behind bars today. Yes, I was kidnapped one night from my house a few months ago, when 25 masked men came to my house, and I was sleeping with my 8-year daughter, picked me up from bed with their guns and masked faces and blindfolded me and handcuffed my hand and beat me, pulled me in front of my kids, take me to an unknown place for a couple of hours, beat me, but they returned me back home, thank God. But we have colleagues who died, who were taken from their home, never came back, who were killed by the security of... and unfortunately, what we see now, we see people like this are being awarded by the government rather than bringing them to justice. Human rights activists have paid high price in Bahrain that, although these, again, I'll go back later to the, what have been disappointing us, and I'm sorry again if I repeat that, because sometimes I don't know what I've done, repeat or not, because it's the fourth time I'm speaking from morning. And I'm sorry if I repeat that, because I think that is very important to us. The silence of the international community. Complete silence of international community is not accepted. It's very clear their interest has more priority than our human right. Do we have to pay the price for being in a rich region? Do we have to pay the price for being in an oil region? We are today. Our people are being killed, our people are being tortured, are being targeted. But silence from media, silence from international community, very soft criticism from Western government headed by United States government, unfortunately. That does not have an impact that does not pass a positive message to the people. Do we want to tell our people that if your government is our enemy, then yes, we will fight for democracy as we did in Syria and Libya. But if your government is our friend, like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, we can't do nothing about it. No, that's not good. That's not good. That's not good. If you want to build, if you look for your long-lasting interest, you should build a relation with people who believes in democracy, who believes in the same values, who believes in the same principles that you have. Not with those dictators who are killing their own people, whom you wake up every day, they have a problem somewhere. Peace is not going to come with dictators. It's with democracy. Prosperity, economic prosperity is not with dictator or repressive regime, but with democracy. Tolerance is in democracy. With democracy, it will not be brought by dictators. You will wake up and you will see every day we have started our... In fact, due to the reluctance of the action made by any government in the Western government, we have seen the same thing on the media. Because why CNN will come and talk about what happened in Bahrain when none of the people in the administration will talk about Bahrain? The Western media does reflect the Western attitude, the Western governments. Why the BBC will talk about Bahrain when no one of the politicians in there will talk about Bahrain? We have seen we were also, even Al Jazeera, which considered to be the most independent, whom a lot of people view it. But I'm talking about, I have to make that very clear, I'm talking about Arabic Al Jazeera, because Arabic Al Jazeera is far different than the English Al Jazeera. Arabic Al Jazeera, which is for Bahrain or for the whole region, considered to be like, it is the channel that covers the revolution, means that is a fair revolution, a good revolution. If it does not do that, it's not good revolution. Al Jazeera covered all the revolution. When it comes to Bahrain, they were silenced. Now you have to tell them why they were silenced. We understand. Because Qatar also, which direct Al Jazeera left and right, it's another country ruled by a family. If anything happened in Bahrain, democracy tomorrow happen in Bahrain, it will have an impact on Saudi, it will have an impact on Qatar. Yes, they said Saudi send the troops because they are afraid also that you might have impact in their country. Yes, it will have impact. And this is what is our aim. This is what we're struggling for. We want democracy in the whole region. For how long we have to live ruled by families and ruled by tribes? We are living in the United States. We come, we learn, we study, we see a lot of how democracy, how people enjoying democracy, how people enjoying. We want to have the same thing. That's not a crime for us and for our people to be killed. And it is continuing, again I repeat, continuing supporting those dictators is not going to serve anybody's interest other than those families. I was asked to speak about the Bassiouni report. I'm sure many of you want to hear about Bassiouni report as well. No, because speaking 4 times is not an easy thing. The same government which committed the crimes, the same government which committed the violation, the same king of Bahrain who was behind the state security law or behind the emergency law and was the reason for all this crime committed, he thought one day of forming a commission of inquiry. We see that as a positive step, although we don't encourage replacing human rights groups by commission made by dictators and repressive leaders. But still, we say we want to grab any chance. And there are reports, and we don't think it's perfect, but we think it's a good one. Many of it, its recommendation, if it has been taken into consideration, it is good. It talks about all the trials that have been made in Bahrain, does not meet international standard. It does not meet the Bahrain constitution. In fact, it violates Bahrain constitution, it violates Bahraini laws. It talks about the arrest. In fact, it talks about many things what Human Rights Watch and Human Rights First, Amnesty and International Federation for Human Rights were talking about. And he put up a recommendation, and we will support those recommendations to be implemented. We don't think it's the perfect report, but we think that those implementation need to be, it's a step, government could take it as a step 1 for reform. It's not going to solve our political crisis because it talks about violation, crimes committed in Bahrain between February and March and April. It's not talking about the political crisis in Bahrain, but it's an opportunity should be taken by our rulers. If they're serious about it, if they take this, it could be step 1 to start a reform and to reconciliate with their own people. And I think this is the last, I think I've read that somewhere in Washington Post or somewhere, say the last chance for Bahrain government. And I think also it's the last chance for Bahrain government to correct and to release all. Although the report talks about all the cases where does not meet international standard, does not violate human rights, violate Bahraini laws, but those people are still in jail. They were not released. And in fact, the trial still continue. Although he says all those people are arbitrarily arrested, and those court does not, I mean, it's illegal, but people are still in jail. So the implementation government does not seem to be serious about implementing this recommendation. One, the first two things they have done now since the recommendation were out a few days ago, they have removed the head of the state security apparatus, but they upgraded him. They awarded him a better job, which is heading the council, the State Security Council. And then again, they form a commission to implement the recommendation. But many members of this commission were people part of the problem. They have taken a stand against the protest and protester. So you can't bring them to be part of the solution now. Part of the problem can't be a part of the solution. Anyway, I'm not going to continue for long, and I'm going to stop, and I need to see your question better than I just keep speaking, because I know you have many things to say, to ask. But I would say that whatever it's going to cost, we started our uprising. We started the Arab upspring in our region, and in Bahrain, 14th of February. We're going to continue. We know road is difficult. We know the job is costly. But I think the people of Bahrain willing to pay that cost to see the change. And we will never go back. And I'm urging people in here, if you want to be in the light part of history or the right part of history, you should, by practice, not by saying. And we're our hand open to everybody. We don't want to kill our killers. We don't want to punish people who killed our children and our loved one. We want to have, we want to reconcile. We want to have a dialogue. We believe in dialogue. We don't believe that arm could solve the political crisis. We don't believe that violence and blood will ever solve political problem. Tolerance, love, dialogue, talk, it's going to solve. And now, after 9 or 10 months, we have many people died, but it did not solve our problem. The problem is going on. And we are going to continue our struggle till we achieve our goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nabeel, for these inspiring and stimulating remarks. Let me also thank President Harman for her wonderful introduction, and say that we want to engage with all of you in a dialogue. To lead off this dialogue, this conversation, we have a very distinguished panel of experts. I won't, like Khale earlier on the panel, won't do lengthy introductions. You all have their distinguished biographies, CVs in front of you. Let me just call on our first commentator, Wafa Ali, who is a Wilson Center Middle East journalist in residence, specializing in the political affairs of Bahrain. She was formerly an anchor and editor with Bahrain TV, political columnist for Al Balad newspaper, and editor of the investigations section of Huna Al Bahrain magazine. It's wonderful to have you here, and you have the floor, and you will add another Bahraini perspective to this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. And first, I would like to thank the president of Bahrain Center for Human Rights, Mr. Nabeel Rajab, for his paper, which is truly express human rights and political points of view that reflect the points of views of large groups in Bahraini community that is going a very difficult period. I would like to emphasize that the Bahraini demands during our Arab Spring are legitimate national demands. But being a journalist and a scholar in Wilson Center makes it imperative to stand at the distance for all parties to diagnose and read the actual Bahraini crisis. It's a crisis that's complex and one that unfortunately have going beyond a conflict between government and political opposition and has become much more dangerous type of conflict, which is sectarian. The report of Bassiouni Independent Committee was the most outstanding event during the last week, so we have to look at this report, its significance and its impact of reality of the relationship between the opposing parties. And try to understand the factors that contributed to this sharp break between the opposing party. Let me spell out 4 fundamental points from the Bassiouni report. These 4 points shows that there are 2 parts of Bahrain's current crisis. One is that the government in a conflict with the opposition that is calling for reform. The second part is that there is a new, sharp, dangerous sectarian division in Bahrain. First, the report concluded that protesters have been mistreated, subjected to wide-ranging torture, and were laid off from their jobs and students from their universities. This came as a result of the royal family radical wing's success in overcome the moderate lead by the US educated crown prince. This led to crisis of trust between the regime and the opposition. It didn't stop here, but went to the point where hardline Sunnis were supporting the police attack on protesters as well as the mistakes of the government. At the same time, the king's claim of the Iranian involvement with the protesters hurt Shiite people because it's allow everybody to describe them as traitors. This explains the extreme reaction from the protesters against the royal family and the hardline Sunnis supporters. The radical faction of royal family that stand strongly with the security measures consist mainly of the prime minister on one side and the minister of royal court on the other side, who have been responsible of discrimination against Shiites in all decision-making positions. They also have tried to change the demographic structure of Bahrain by naturalizing thousands of Arab and foreigners and creating shadow organization against opposition civil society organization. When the radicals push the king to clear Pearl or the Lulu roundabout, the moderate crown prince influence disappeared from the picture completely and leaving the field open for the radicals to turn whole the crackdown, and the result was this severe repression. Second, the Bassiouni report also concluded that Sunnis were subject to assault by individuals because they are supporting the royal family. It was clear that among the protesters in Lulu roundabout, there were moderate, who were the majority, and there were also radicals. The moderate was calling for constitutional monarchy and or constitutional reform and establishing for constitutional monarchy, and they were prepared to enter negotiation with the crown prince. It is now clear that the moderate lead by the main position party Al-Wifaq and its opposition partners made a strategic mistake by not immediately accepting to enter into the dialogue offered by the Crown Prince. Meanwhile, the radical opposition's adoption of the overthrowing the regime opened the door for a protester to personally assault individuals for the royal family, calling for their death and departure from the country as a part of its belief of their defiant fall. This hurt the members of the royal family and inside or outside the direct circle, direct political decision circle, and made them turn toward the hardline movement, which represented in their savior. Not only that, but it's pushed some of the protesters to arrest and directly assault Sunnis due their loyalty to the regime and consider them as Salvis. As the report stated, is it true that the radical protesters' action and demands push some protesters to assault Sunnis simply because of their loyalty to the regime. Third, the report denied any connection between the protest that called for democracy with the Iranian Islamic Republican. It appears from the official Bahrainis and GCC countries' statement that they are disappointed with the Iranian media, which call the Arab Spring the Islamic weakening. In addition, some Iranian association and parliamentaries insulting of Bahrainis supremacy. But now it's clear that the crisis in Bahrain is an internal crisis and the solution also is internal. And it comes from the long time practice of the government of considering Shi'is as a second-class citizens. Fourth, report denied the involvement of the GCC Shlayed force in the crackdown of the demonstrations or direct connect with the protesters. This conclusion of the Bassiouni report supports the position that the presence of the GCC Shield force was meant as a direct political message against Iran, first of all, and against those radical movements calling for a republic. The GCC Shield arrived in Bahrain can also be seen a message to the United States, whose officials were trying to arrange a meeting between the opposition and the Crown Prince, even after the GCC force crossed into Bahrain. The GCC message to Washington was no constitutional monarchy in Bahrain. So, sorry for this. I want to conclude by saying that we are in a confused period. Some see the political reform as the way to them to achieve fairness as a full first-class citizen. But other groups see democracy as a weapon that can be used against them. These different views of Bahrain future makes it difficult to reach real political reform in our tiny but very strategic island. And what makes it more difficult is that it's the same government that committed these crimes, and the same government who now heading the committee whose responsibility is implementing the request of the report. We need a new contract, we need a new social contract that redefined the relationship between Bahrainis people and the royal family. And we need a real reconciliation that puts all the fears from every side on the table for discussion and negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafa. Karl Gershman has already been introduced as president of the National Endowment for Humanity.
Democracy.
The National Endowment for Democracy.
Same difference.
The expansion of which he has overseen over the last few years, and he has been very much at the heart of the movement, including helping to launch in 1999 the World Movement for Democracy, which is a global network of democracy practitioners and scholars. As President Harman mentioned, I've had the privilege of sharing the Ratiu Award here at the Center since 2006 in close partnership with the Ratiu Foundation and the Ratiu Democracy Center in Turda, and the National Endowment for Democracy has been a close partner all along the way, and so I'm very delighted to introduce Karl and give him the floor.
Thanks very much. So turn this on. Okay, thanks very much. And my congratulations to Nabeel. This is a very important award. And also my congratulations to the Wilson Center and the Ratiu Foundation for your timing. It's terrific. 1 week after issuing this very important report, and which makes it, at the moment, a critical time in Bahrain. The report of the Bahrainis Commission is really a devastating attack on the human rights abuses that have taken place in Bahrain, and it's an indictment of the behavior of the security forces. It documents, as has already been said, physical and psychological torture. Prisoners were whipped, kicked, beaten with rubber hoses, subjected to electric shock treatment, deprived of sleep, exposed to high temperatures, threatened with rape. 5 of the prisoners died, according to the report, as a result of this treatment, and 45 people actually died overall in the uprising. Such treatment, according to the report, was systematic. It uses that word, nearly all of the victims being Shias. In addition, according to the report, because officials were not held accountable for these abuses and the torture, which violated both Bahrain's penal code and international treaties against torture, to which Bahrain is a signatory, a culture of impunity, in the words of the report, has spread throughout the security forces. And a climate of fear was also created in the society as a result of these abuses and late-night and pre-dawn attacks on residences, targeting individuals for their participation in protests and their political activity. Some 30 Shia mosques were demolished, and thousands of workers were dismissed from their jobs because they supported the protests and took part in strikes that were permissible under Bahraini law. This is a very harshly critical report, and King Hamad is to be commended, not just for commissioning the report. No other Arab government has allowed this degree of public scrutiny of its behavior and allowing it to be broadcast to the nation, and also for saying that he accepted its recommendations. This took courage, as did his statement that, I quote, that any government that has a sincere desire to reform and progress should understand the benefit of objective and constructive criticism. All this is good, but there are very, very serious problems. Some have to do with the recommendations of the report, which deferred investigations of the abuses to the government, raising questions about accountability of the security forces. In addition, the government has established, as was already noted, a national committee to examine the recommendations of the report, and it's to report back in February, raising concerns that the urgency of the moment will pass without anything changing. Moreover, while the Commission said that the members of such a committee, or any committee established as a result of these recommendations, should be jointly appointed, the composition of this committee has been unilaterally determined by the government. Even more worrisome, the day after the report was issued, on November the 24th, the security forces once again used force to put down a peaceful demonstration suggesting that everything is proceeding as before. The core of the problem is that the country is paralyzed by a complete standoff, and no initiative is coming from the government or the opposition to start a process of meaningful dialogue. And this is a deeply divided society. One member of the commission that presented the report, Sir Nigel Rodley, a former UN Special Rapporteur on torture, went so far as to compare Bahrain to Northern Ireland, a country, Bahrain, that is so poisonously polarized along sectarian lines that it is possibly on the verge of a much greater explosion of violence than we've seen so far. It's not just the country that's divided, so is the government. The real power is not in the hands of the king or the crown prince, who is an advocate of reform, but rather in the hands of the prime minister, who has been in power for the last 40 years and who shows no signs whatsoever of leaving or of changing. And behind the prime minister stands Saudi Arabia, which is opposed to any reform and sees the opposition as simply Shia agents of Iran. The report of the Basuni Commission found no evidence of any kind, as we've heard, to support the government's contention that Iran was behind the protests. It rightly said that these protests were entirely the product of the internal grievances of Bahrainis. Are we to believe that leading human rights activists in Bahrain are agents of a despotic Iranian regime? Among the Bahrainians who are in prison now are Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, the co-founder and former president of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, Ali Abdel-Iman, a prominent blogger and human rights activist, and Abdul Jalil al-Singasi, a former fellow at Stanford and a personal friend who heads the Human Rights Bureau of the Haq Movement for Civil Liberties and Democracy. The idea that these human rights advocates and the people they work with, including Nabeel, are somehow connected to the Iranian regime, which is against human rights, is both absurd and obscene. They have much more in common with the Green Movement in Iran and the people who have died and suffered for freedom there than they have with the thugs who repressed them. And what about Ibrahim Sharif, the Sunni moderate, who's also in prison, the Sunni moderate and civil society activist who is affiliated with the secular National Democratic Action Society, or WAD? He too is in prison. Is he also an Iranian stooge? In fact, if there is not an accommodation in Bahrain, if the current standoff continues, it is only Iran that will benefit. Frankly, if the people of Bahrain are abandoned in the way Nabeel said they are being abandoned by a world of silence, they may be, in fact, forced into the arms of Iran. The regime in Iran would welcome an explosion in Bahrain. In her speech last month to the National Democratic Institute, Secretary of State Clinton, who Jane mentioned before, was very clear on this point. She said, "Meaningful reform and equal treatment for all Bahrainis are in Bahrain's interest, in the region's interest, and in our interest, while endless unrest benefits Iran and extremists." Secretary Clinton in this speech commended the government in Bahrain for recognizing, and I quote, "the need for dialogue, reconciliation, and concrete reforms." She added that we do intend to hold the Bahraini government to these commitments and to encourage the opposition to respond constructively to secure lasting reform. Regrettably, though, Bahrain is not now in a position by itself to initiate this urgently needed process of dialogue and reform. It is simply too divided and too beholden to Saudi Arabia. The United States must help. Bahrain is, in fact, one country in this complex and troubled region of the Middle East where the United States actually has the ability to act effectively. It needs to take bold and meaningful steps to assure those committed to reform in Bahrain that the United States stands with them, that we will help them, support them, and defend them if they undertake a process of gradual and meaningful reform toward constitutionalism, greater equality, and political enfranchisement. Only this can break the deadlock, can encourage the reformers in the government to feel sufficiently confident and secure to start a process of change to which the opposition can and should respond in a constructive way. Will this produce instability and chaos? The Saudis will say that it will. But in fact, reform is the only way to avoid an explosion. Does anyone really think that the monarchies of the Gulf can permanently shield themselves from the historic changes taking place in the Middle East? This tsunami to which Nabeel referred? They can't hold back change, but they must find a way to adjust to it, to manage it, and to accommodate to it. Bahrain is a very, very small country, but it can play a leading role in this process. It can be a model for the peaceful and orderly transition from authoritarianism to a constitutional monarchy. It can lead by example. It has the economic capacity to do this. It has the human capital and resources to do this. And it now has the opportunity to do this. Let us hope that with our help, they can seize this opportunity and realize its full potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final commentator on this panel is Tom Malinowski, the Washington Director for Human Rights Watch and an expert on U.S. foreign policy. He's responsible for the organization's overall advocacy efforts with the U.S. government. He also has served in the past as special assistant to President Clinton and as senior director for foreign policy speechwriting on the National Security Council. Tom, you have the floor.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for being here. It's a great honor for me to share this table with you, Nabeel. As Jane mentioned, you've been part of our family at Human Rights Watch for a number of years. You have advised our efforts to defend the rights of people throughout the Middle East. And unfortunately, this year, we've had to defend your rights, not to go through the experience that you briefly described in your speech. And I hope that we never have to do that again for you or for anybody else in Bahrain. It's great to see this turnout, to hear you speak. I think it proves that you, unlike your government, do not need a PR firm. By the way, whenever I hear that a government like Bahrain has hired a PR firm, I'm not upset in the way that you think that I might be. I think it's actually great. They're spending their money here. It's stimulus for the Washington economy. And it doesn't work, right? So it's a complete win-win for us. So don't be bothered by that. Well, you don't need to hear from me about Bahrain because you have Nabeel to tell you about that. So I thought I'd maybe make a few comments and observations about U.S. policy towards Bahrain and how it's evolved, how it ought to evolve. You talked about that tsunami that has changed the region. There's also been maybe a smaller tsunami that has changed America's perception of the Middle East in the last year. Before the Arab Spring, I think most Americans, most policymakers in Washington saw their strategic interests in the region in terms of places, not people. And that was particularly true, nowhere more true than in the Gulf, where the only people who mattered really to us were maybe a couple of dozen people who held the keys to security cooperation and other things that were needed. And we didn't really see anybody else. That's obviously been changing throughout the region. We had, the people of Libya stood up, and people of Syria stood up, the people of Egypt stood up, and they said, we're not Gaddafi, we're not Assad, we're not Mubarak, nor are we Al-Qaeda. We want what you want, as you eloquently said. We're here. Notice us, pay attention to us, and we matter. And U.S. policy has had to adjust to that reality, which should have been plain a long time ago, that the people matter as well. But as before, the Gulf or at least U.S. policy towards the Gulf, has lagged behind in terms of that realization. I don't think it's correct to say there's been complete silence with respect to Bahrain, because President Obama has spoken about it several times. Secretary Clinton has spoke about it. Intermittently, we've seen condemnations of abuses by the government, calls for reform, and I think a fairly energetic diplomatic effort behind the scenes to try to find some sort of political solution to the crisis. But obviously, there has not been the kind of consistency I think that some of us would want to see between the U.S. approach to Bahrain and other countries in the region, which isn't to say that I would expect the United States government to treat a strategic ally like Bahrain in the same way that it would treat Gaddafi or Assad. That's not the kind of consistency that I'm looking for, but something that is within the boundaries of acceptable deviation from consistency, I think is fair to expect. And at times, I think the administration has fallen short of that. Now, the real reasons for this are absolutely self-evident, and they are in a way understandable. The United States does have, as folks at the State Department like to say, other equities, which is to say that policy has been driven towards Bahrain and the Gulf by interests like the containment of Iran and support for the U.S. military presence in Iraq, which are real interests. And those of us who care about human rights but are also realistic understand that those are going to have to be part of the calculation when the United States approaches governments like Bahrain. And I would actually prefer that they be honest about that and that they say, look, this is what we have to do. But sometimes it's hard for policymakers to be honest about that, and so they kind of come up with other rationalizations. And one that I wanted to mention briefly, because it comes up again and again in terms of Bahrain, is the rationalization that, oh, this problem would be so much easier to solve if only the opposition were more reasonable, you know? If only they didn't make these radical demands, like, you know, ending the monarchy, as some, not a majority, as you put it, but as some do make. And this is sort of human, you know, when victims accuse you of not doing enough to help them, sometimes you blame the victim, right? It's a kind of a normal psychological reaction. But it's unfortunate in this case. You know, I have a good friend who works at the White House, and he told me about a meeting on Bahrain that took place early in the crisis, in which this argument was being made. You know, well, what can we do? They're calling for, some of these people are rejectionists, and you know what that means. It means they're against the monarchy. And my friend pointed to a painting that was hanging on the wall of this conference room at the White House. And on the painting was a figure known as George Washington. And he pointed out, well, you know, he was kind of a rejectionist too. And he was slightly less nonviolent than these Bahraini oppositionists. Now, I think it's fine for us to conclude that the best way to solve this crisis is to find an answer that accommodates the legitimate interests of the royal family as well as the interests of the opposition in having a representative government. I personally believe that from a pragmatic standpoint, that's the best way forward. But I think it's important, even as we say that, even as we maybe take issue with some of the decisions that the opposition made along the way from a tactical point of view, that we not look down on people in Bahrain who want what I think any of us would want in our hearts if we lived there, and that is not to live in a country that is ruled by a single family forever. That is understandable, even if tactically we may think that some accommodation between the two sides makes better sense. Now, what to do going forward? Look, I think if promoting reform in Bahrain is an interest that matters to the United States, then we have to be willing to stake something that matters in order to pursue it. That's always what you do when something really matters to you. And therefore, it's important to do more than just issue verbal statements, condemnations, encouragement, as important as that is. Now, interestingly, I think one of the most effective steps that the administration has taken recently in putting pressure on the Bahraini government was completely inadvertent, and that was this whole drama with the arms sale that was proposed and then taken back. although sometimes I like to think that this was actually one of the most brilliantly devious things that any administration has ever done to promote democracy in another country, to promote an arms sale that was obviously a dumb idea and obviously unsustainable politically, knowing that, of course, the Congress would object and human rights groups would object, at which point you would have to pull it back and thus send a very powerful message to the Bahraini government that status quo just can't continue, but without having your fingerprints on the decision entirely. So let's say it was a deliberate decision. But I think the interesting thing is that we are clearly better off than we would have been had the arms sale never been proposed, because the whole episode, however it all went down, has sent a pretty clear message. I think it's been kind of a wake-up call to the Bahraini government that they're not going to go back to a status quo relationship with the United States unless they try to fix this problem. Now, what should the U.S. be asking for? I think we probably all would agree about that. It begins with implementation of the recommendations of the Bassiouni report, but keep in mind those recommendations are very modest, and so one does have to go beyond that. There has to be I think, a fairly clear and consistent set of demands, requests, whatever you want to call it, from the United States that are made as this process goes on, releasing prisoners who are unjustly detained and convicted, reform of the security forces, and addressing the underlying political demands of the protest movements, of the protest movement that brought this whole drama into being. In other words, demands for a representative parliament and an empowered elected government, which can go by the name of a constitutional monarchy or not, to make the opposition an offer that is serious enough that will draw them into negotiations, that will convince them that the government is sincere about this. And, the alternative to this is something that should be unthinkable for the United States. The alternative is a deepening crisis in a country that is a fault line between the Shia and the Sunni worlds, a crisis in which the United States, because of its military relationship with Bahrain, will inevitably be seen as taking a side in that sectarian divide, the side of a hardline dictatorship that is putting down a Shia movement for legitimate rights. And that's not a place where the United States should want to be. I don't know any policymaker, including at the Pentagon, who, if confronted with that possibility, would say, that's where we want to be. But that's where we're going to be if we don't do the kinds of things that Carl, I think, eloquently suggested we need to do, and make the promotion of reform and human rights the first priority, so that we can sustain the relationship over time that others with other equities do want to sustain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. We have a good half hour for discussion. Nabeel, would you like to react to any of the presentations immediately, or we'll just open it up for discussion? So if you could please, as in the earlier session, wait for the microphone and please state your name and affiliation if you like. So the gentleman right here in the center. Please wait for the microphone. It's coming. We're webcasting this event live, so your question would not be able to be heard.
Thank you very much. I particularly want to thank the panel for addressing the role of the United States. And obviously, we have, even by non-reaction, have a role. I'd like to give Najib a chance to play act for a minute. Assume you're in the Oval Office. You're talking to President Obama or his successor. And he has just been told, the president has just been told by one of his advisors, listen, we've got a fleet off the coast of Bahrain. We have a base there. We've had democracy in other countries. We saw Hamas get elected in Gaza. We saw Hezbollah in Lebanon. You guys are all, you have a Shia majority. You're close to Iran. Now, we're sympathetic to your views, but we would like to know what we can do, and both Carl and Tom have addressed this, what we can do, bold and meaningful, in Carl's words, to help you, and look at it in two ways. What should we do and what could we do? Because there may be a difference. And what will be the result of whatever actions we take? The result you want and the result that we want. How can we get to that objective?
Thank you. Could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm Lou Mendelson, and I'm a international consultant.
Thank you. Nabeel?
You're in the Oval Office.
I don't know if I understand the question well, but maybe you meant that democracy in Bahrain, if it comes, it might harm the American interests, if you mean that. But because you have brought the Fifth Fleet as an example.
Well, the question
Wait, excuse me, you can just wait for the microphone, please.
No, just to clarify the question, basically, we have to look out for American interests and your interests, okay? And we're not just talking about American interests in Bahrain, but in the Middle East. And we have a very fluid situation. So the President is asking you for your advice as someone who is a Bahraini on how we can maintain our friendship to the people of Bahrain and also maintain the interests that are important to us without, we want to know where we're going to end up when we help you and how we can help you in a way that will end up that's beneficial to you and beneficial to the United States.
Thank you.
I hope I'm in the administration so I can ask this political answer, but still I will answer you. I think United States is the most influential partner in our region. Right or wrong, but it is. They're stronger than United Nations. And the statement, demand by United States, always taken into consideration very seriously by our government and government in the region. And they can play a big role than what they're playing now. They could bring the government into a dialogue, into certain standard that guarantees every party's interest. The opposition in Bahrain does not, I don't know if you mean that or not also, but I'm going to say it. I don't see any of the opposition in Bahrain or the political group have a problem with the United States government. In fact, as I know, all parties, they do meet and they have good relation with the United States government. They have no problem with them. And now the situation is it's harming everybody. The stability of this country is in the interest of United States. It's in the interest of our interest. We have a mutual interest in this country. Is the stability. What the regime is doing is not what policy regime is implementing is not for the stability. It's a very dangerous policy. So United States have to bring the regime and have to make them sit in a table with the opposition, meet those grievances, legitimate one. Those people want to elect the government. You still can have your throne. You can have your power. You can be king. But those people want to rule themselves also. They want to have parliament that has power. They want to have an elected government. They want to stop this systematic discrimination against the Shia population. All this is human rights issues. Through this, the United States could do a lot. United States have their own human rights report. We see it every year, March. But it's a very good one. But you don't see anything really. That human rights report has nothing to do with the American policy. You don't see that the report have any influence in the American policy. What we think, no, American has to have a criteria, even in their relation with the outsider, criteria which is in human right. As they talk into other countries, well, there is the democracy is not harming United States interest in Bahrain. It is not. This is what the regimes are trying to convince the United States. These are what this repressive regime in our Gulf region. They try to convince the United States that democracy is not going to help the interests of the United States, but I think it will help the interests of the whole world.
Thanks, Nabeel. Wafa?
I want just to mention that the problem in Bahrain, the solution for the problem in Bahrain is the democracy, because now we don't have another choice to solve these. Otherwise, we will not have a stability in Bahrain, which will have an impact in U.S. interest also. And what I want to mention that when we have the demonstrations in 14 February, we didn't hear any statement from the opposition that's against the United States first, or ask also the Fifth Fleet to leave, for example, because you mentioned. And the head of Al-Wifaq, for example, Sheikh Ali Salman, he said that we don't and we will not ask the Fifth Fleet to leave. It means that they want to keep the link between the Bahrain and the United States. And it's my opinion that to have a good relation with the United States is save Bahrain, because we are in sensitive location between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which they have a conflict, and we don't want to be a place that these two parties use it against each other. So I think that United States, when they will push for the democracy in Bahrain, they will take the advantage, and because they will support the stability in Bahrain.
Thank you.
Very quickly. In talking to U.S. officials about this, I don't think any of them are worried that the opposition would, if it came to power, would kick out the Fifth Fleet. I don't think too many of them buy the argument that Iran is somehow behind all of this. And so, that kind of, it raises the question, what is it that they're worried about? I think it's that they have a relationship with the present government. It's a very important relationship to them, and particularly to the Pentagon. And if they came down too hard, the government would probably still be there for at least some time, and it would make it hard to continue that relationship. And I'm not sure if that's true. I think that's what they think. But I don't think, for example, that if the U.S. suspended military aid to Bahrain for a while, it kind of has already, that the Bahrainis would kick out the Fifth Fleet, because I think as important as it is to the U.S. security interest to have a naval presence based in Bahrain, I think it's even more important to Bahraini interests. To us, it's important. To them, it's existential. And I don't see the current Bahraini government saying to the United States, pack your bags because you've pressed us too hard on this democracy thing, because it's even more important to them than it is to us.
Okay, thank you. Mircea?
Mircea Montano. I used to work at the Wilson Center for quite a while. I have a question about the relationship, the similarities, I guess, or the differences between Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And what I see as the two key differences, one being that the regimes in the region, as long as oil stays high in price, are able to buy off dissent in the population. And it's hard to get the population to rebel on a large scale if the regime can buy it off. That's a key difference between that and the crumbling governments of Eastern Europe in 1989. The other question has to do, again, with what I see as a key difference, and that is the Eastern Europeans looked at the West, be it the United States or Europe, Western Europe at the time, as models to be emulated, both politically but also culturally. They identify themselves with the West. That is not necessarily the case for a large percentage or maybe a majority of the people of the Middle East, where democracy, or the Western type of democracy, it doesn't seem to be the model that they necessarily want to emulate. And that might be because of external factors. My question has to do is, how do you how do we, as the West, as the United States or Europe, how do we help the Middle East in a way that takes into account our own interests as well, and not creating a situation where the devil you don't know becomes much more dangerous than the devil you do know? Because I think at this particular point, the policy is, well, at least we know those guys, as opposed to we don't know what to expect. How do you help how do you help the people of the region when you're facing those two challenges?
Thank you. Nabeel, you want to respond to that?
Will not take more questions. You think?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I'd like.
Okay. I mean, people have to have the right to choose the type and of the political system that should govern them, and we should not impose any kind of model. And as far as they respect the whole human right, I don't know if I'm answering your question, or if I understand your question or not.
Carl, I think you also want to respond.
Well, it's sort of, in a way, it was addressed to me, even though he did address it to me, but that's sort of what we try to do. The differences between the Middle East and Central Europe are obvious. Religion, culture, location, oil, all those things. But I think the similarities are larger if we step back from the situation. If we look at it today, there's going to be a lot of concern with what's just happened in Egypt and the results of the election. But I really think it's necessary to take a long-term perspective, and it's very important that we do not panic. We do not abandon the situation. We have a long-term concept of what we have to do. We stay with it, and we recognize what the basic forces are at work here. And I think it might also be helpful to remember, when we think of democracy as a Western idea, the trouble that the West went through to establish democracy. If you go back to the French Revolution and think about what happened in France, in Germany, in Spain, in the United States with our Civil War, in all of the countries, really, of the West, the violence was horrible, horrible. So far, things are going relatively well, but there will be a lot of rough spots here. But what I think is terribly important about what's happening in the Middle East, and I think this should be remembered, is that people are trying to solve their own problems. That's basically what's happening. And they're trying to solve them within national boundaries. Bahrain is trying to solve Bahraini problems. Egypt is trying to solve Egyptian problems, Tunisia, and so forth. And that's really terrific. That's the beginning of democracy, taking responsibility, having defined borders where you try to have the rights of citizens, where you try to establish a workable government with accountability, with transparency, with all of the things, the independent judiciary, all of the things that you need. That's going to take time. It wasn't easy for us. It wasn't easy for Germany or Spain. But, that's where it's going. And you're just going to have to stay with it. And we're going to have to also, I think, stay united on this and not, start in a very polemical way, start arguing with each other over who's responsible for, this bad election or that bad election.
Okay. Gentleman up front here. We have a number of questions, so if you could keep it brief, that'd be great.
I'm Bert Wides. I worked on national security in the executive and legislative branch, but now I'm pro bono counsel on human rights in Middle East and Asia. And I want to focus on U.S. policy. So I have a question for, I think, Mr. Gershman, Mr. Malinowski. Very briefly, the narrative that I saw was the U.S., even after it was widely acknowledged that the King's dialogue offers after the prince was pushed aside were fake and were not meaningful, but the U.S. government was still referring to them as meaningful dialogues, as the president did in his UN speech, and as the ambassador in his confirmation said, it was unfortunate the opposition walked away from them. So now, and right before the report came, I think in Washington there was a lot of expectation that the U.S. might use the issuance of the report as a satisfactory basis for going back to the arms deal. I think you may give them too much credit for strategic ingenuity. So my question is, right now, since the report has been hailed as so good in detail, but doesn't really get to who was responsible at the top or deal that much with political reform, how can human rights groups, the Congress, and others who are concerned keep the bar high enough so that the administration can't say, well, they're moving, they've set up this and that, we'll keep our eye on the negotiations and go back to business as usual?
Thank you. Who'd like to answer that?
Tom, why don't you start?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was some fear that they would use the report as the trigger to go back to business as usual. They, in the wake of the arms sale drama, they did say that what they were waiting for was not the report, but the government's response to the report. In other words, they were waiting to see how the government would implement the recommendations of the report, which I thought was good. That was where we wanted them to be. Now, as I and I think others mentioned, the report itself, the recommendations are fairly limited. So you don't solve the crisis in Bahrain even if you implement all the recommendations of the report. I think the administration understands that based on our conversations with them. I think they clearly get it that you need some reform process in order to solve the problems. And I think what we need to just constantly remind them of is just how scary it will be if the problem isn't solved in that way. In other words, it's not just, oh, well, whoops, we tried. I guess Bahrain's just going to remain a dictatorship for a while, which is too bad, but at least it's stable and we have our security relationship. You don't get that option anymore. And I think, again, intellectually they get that, but it's to actually act on it is much harder than to pretend that it's not true, because to act on it means you have to have friction in the relationship, and nobody wants that.
Well, just very briefly, whatever happened before, I think we're going to have to really get serious now. It's not only that there's a real opportunity out there and possibility to do something, but there's a great danger, a really great danger. And as I also tried to say, I think this is a problem that we, as difficult as this problem is, it's doable. We can really take action here. We have essentially a friendly relationship. You do have a divided government, so the trick here is to tip the balance in a standoff situation. And I think if the U.S. were to take a bold move, maybe sending, the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense there with a mandate to, with a mission to really try to get the process moving, leading toward really real reform. And I think, you can't ask the opposition to come on board a process if it's phony. I mean, it has to be real. And so you have to be moving toward a constitutional monarchy.
How do we get
administration to do that? We have additional questions. I can't allow follow-up questions at the moment. So let me just, while Nabeel's getting back settled down, we have an intervention a statement from the overflow room. I just want to acknowledge those in our audience as well. Chia Chen from Bethesda, who states that the United States should stand more positive. Egypt may be a model. The United States should be neutral in helping to calm the situation and have an election. Let them have a government established and manage their national affairs. All right, our next speaker is Ross Johnson on the right side here.
I suppose it's a follow-up to the last remark that Carl made.
Introduce yourself, Ross.
Ross Johnson, the Wilson Center. A divided government, but we've had several mentions in the course of this afternoon to the Saudi influence, which I take it to be significant and perhaps from the American point of view here, pernicious. Apart from concrete demands or requests to the Bahrain government, is there some way that the U.S. can influence Saudi behavior in a positive direction?
We can leave that as a comment, or do you want to?
Solar energy. That's all I got, sorry.
All right, we'll go to the gentleman up front here.
Thank you. Ahmed Abdul Hussein, I'm a lawyer and a political activist. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Nabeel Rajab, for your efforts and your colossal efforts in Bahrain. I hope to one day vote you in as the first president of the Republic of Bahrain. My question very briefly to you is in regards to security sector reform in Bahrain. Now, whilst the Bassiouni report has had many merits and has brazenly covered a lot of the human rights breaches in Bahrain, it has taken a evidently lackadaisical approach in tackling the rudimentary problems that are in Bahrain. What, in your opinion, or how important is, can you just emphasize the importance of security sector reform and the ramifications of not including the absolute Shiite Muslim majority into both the police and the army? Thank you.
I think he just talked about it a little bit about the everybody have to be included in the security and army because our army and our police are made up of one sect of the society. The majority, 75% of the population, are not allowed to work in the army. And there were the arms of United States has been sold for the past many years to a sectarian army made up of one sect and same security institution. Most of people now in the security institution are made up, and this is, I mean, I spoke, I don't know about in this session or the earlier one, but we said this is a big problem and going on. You can't solve your political problem without reforming the military and security institution. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Indre Ratiu.
Indre Ratiu from the Ratiu Democracy Center in Turda, Romania. First of all, thank you very much, President Harman, and to everybody here, the organizers, the team, all of you generous people who've come to participate, and Nabeel for coming at great personal risk. I asked Nabeel earlier on, how did he get out? And he's got a story to tell about that. His situation is not easy, and he comes here at great risk to himself. My question has a bit of background. It relates to the parallel between Eastern Europe that was raised earlier on and the situation in the Middle East. And this question really to Tom and to Carl particularly, as to whether you would agree that maybe the time has come for us to encourage the U.S. administration to, as it were, switch horses in the Middle East in the interests of in U.S. interests. Carol Murphy earlier on today said very frankly, U.S. interests and for the last for a very long time in the Gulf have been led by our interest in stability. As she pointed out, well, it's clear that that isn't working, and that whole thing has really not worked. And indeed, that the very people who the U.S. administration we have been backing in Bahrain have clearly been the source of instability. Now, 30 years ago, my father, Jon Ratiu, who's really the inspiration behind this award, came here to Washington, and we've tried to be a wonderful team here with my brother and I and our own team striving to replicate his experience each time. Came here to Washington to build networks and friends and support for his own campaign, which was for a democratic alternative in Romania at the time. And while he made many friends and won lots of support and went on to found the World Union of Free Romanians and so on, basically his appeal fell on deaf ears here in Washington at the time for strategic interests. Well, no, Romania, Ceausescu's our buddy. This is a beachhead in Eastern Europe. He doesn't like the Soviets. He must be one of us. It was very difficult for Jon to get a word in at the time. And it strikes me that the sense of déjà vu that here is Nabeel coming here to us with essentially the same position. And maybe the time has come for us to listen to questions of principle, of justice, human rights, democracy, freedom, as opposed to, will our fleet be safe? And so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take that as a statement, or do you want to want it?
Well, I mean, just to say he failed in communicating, his message. But look at Romania and look at what happened. The change came. This change is coming. I think we just have to recognize that. And I think the important, and the U.S. is always, the government is frankly almost always going to be interested in stability and very short-term objectives. But there are historical forces at work here, and they're not going to go away.
Thank you. Elliot Sorrell?
Good afternoon. Elliot Sorrell. I'm the senior advisor to the Ratiu Prize. Nabeel, welcome to America. Thank you for the privilege of learning about your experience and your wisdom from the trenches and the front lines. And thank you for the panel. That has been very stimulating and informative. Carl, very passionate but focused. And Tom, reasoned and focused on the best interest of our government. It's inevitable, being in Washington, that will be consumed with what is best for America. But we will be remiss not to focus a bit more on Bahrain and what is not only best for America, but what is also best for Bahrain. And Nabeel made an allusion that hasn't been developed, just mentioned it, namely the issue of reconciliation. I think that's a key piece. The issue of reconciliation between the Sunnis and Shia in Bahrain is one of the keys to a stable society. America cannot fix that. And I think what the Sunnis and Shias in Bahrain, and not only in Bahrain, but in the whole region, will be doing with each other is key to the region, and America better influence it in a positive way. But I do not want the American experts to comment on that. I want Nabeel to comment on that. Nabeel, give it your best shot. What can you do, the Bahraini people, regarding reconciling the Sunnis and Shias of Bahrain? How can that be a model, not just for Bahrain, but could that be a model for existing Sunni Shias in the region? And thirdly, only third in line, how can the United States help?
I don't think that we have a problem, Shia-Sunni problem in Bahrain. But I think we have a problem between the ruling elite or ruling family and the Shias. And they try to use the Shia-Sunni card so for the dispute to look like it is a Shia-Sunni. It's not the Sunni people who don't employ Shias in police and the army, but the king and the ruling family don't do that. Not the Sunnis who are practicing sectarian cleansing in the government institution, but the ruling family doing that. But what they do is that to always try to tell the West that it is a Shia-Sunni matter and we got nothing to do with it. It is the blame of the ruler. It is from one way because it's a simple policy, divide and rule. They believe very strongly once the Sunnis and Shia comes together, they're going to demand and it's going to be dangerous to deal with them. So play like the Yemenis plays on the tribal and the Libyan Al-Qaddafi, and now you see the Syrian Al-Assad by Sunnis, Alawis, and it's the same thing. It's being played in Bahrain, Shia, Sunni, but we don't. It's like Northern Ireland one day. It is just being used. And I think the best thing I always say, I mean, this is we were talking about it. Northern Ireland model is the best thing for Bahrain, because one of our main problem now, it's a the majority of the society, if they feel that they've been marginalized, they pushed out of the political, social, educational system, just to be marginalized. And I think now, even if you have reconciliation, even if you the government, you need to go through a process to get them equal like the other one. And I think, and I was talking to Joe Stock last night, I said the model of the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland that was formed after Good Friday Agreement, that was a good thing. Bahrain is still, we didn't see like a fight between, we've seen attack, but we think it is made up attack by the government. It's not really, I'm talking about, I'm mixed, I'm myself mixed Shias and Sunni. All my nephews, I'm a Shia, but all my nephews and nieces, my sister married to Sunnis. So we are like that, we born and brought up like that. But now, there are a couple of things always played by the regime. One, Iran. Second, the Shia Sunni. One, Iran try to always frighten the West. Oh, this is Iranian influence protest. This is Iranian backed people. So democracy here will help Iranian interests. Now we got out of it after the report of Bassiouni saying whatever going on in Bahrain got nothing to do with Iran. Now we come to the Shia Sunni thing. It is not, it is a made up story. Once there is a political willingness to stop that, government could stop it. It's not a Shia Sunni matter, and Shia Sunni, they have no problem in Bahrain.
Wafa, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe just disagree with Mr. Nabeel Rajab that we have sectarian problem in Bahrain. Maybe the government, yes, create this problem, but the government success when trying to use this paper to do. And it's dangerous to inside the society in Bahrain to see how the conflict now between the Sunnis and Shias. And the Sunnis now they are aware and the fears of the democracy. They feel that the democracy it will be make them the powerless, and they are fears to be like the Iraq example or Lebanon example or so on, that sectarian democracy. So I think the step to solve this problem that the leaders or the leaders in Shiite sect and the leaders in Sunni sect sit in one table and solve this problem between each other, and then take other step to discuss how to make the democracy in Bahrain with the royal family. I mean, if we will take any step to make the reform, it must be the Sunnis and Shias and liberals parties in this table. But we cannot say that we don't have a sectarian problem. Actually, I think we have, yeah.
Thank you, Carl.
As this discussion has been going on, a thought occurred to me, so I thought I would just throw it out. I'm always very skeptical about analogies, because every situation is different. But as this discussion has been going forward, something that occurred to me, which might be something useful that the U.S. could encourage, is something that happened in Poland in 1989. Started in '88, but it culminated in April of '89, and it was what really opened everything up in Central Europe. And that was what was called the Roundtable negotiations, where the government and solidarity with the observance of the church sat around a table for month after month to negotiate, and eventually, they worked out a formula which led to the June elections of June 4th, 1989. I think if such negotiations were to really be meaningful, the people I mentioned in my talk, Al-Khawaja, Abdul Iman, Al-Singhasi, Ibrahim Sharif, these people should be let out to participate in the roundtable negotiations. That would get something started. That would be dramatic. Maybe even you could bring in a couple of Polish friends just to, just to be advisors. So it's not, but I think the U.S. could encourage that. I think that would be meaningful. You'd have a concrete thing you could push for that is not phony, because you can't expect the opposition to respond to something that's phony.
Thank you. Hope Harrison?
Thank you. Hope Harrison from the Wilson Center and George Washington University. I have a question for Nabeel Rajab. You talked about the importance of social media and Twitter, and I'm wondering how important has been your interaction with democracy and human rights activists in other countries in the region? Have you gotten help from them? Have you learned some lessons from them about how to achieve what you're trying to do in Bahrain?
I think we're learning from each other, and we were very active in the Tunisian when they started the revolution. I myself, along with many activists in my Bahrain, they were active. We felt like we're Tunisian. Then when the revolution moved to Egypt, we were all of us, we were Egyptian. And now when it comes to Yemen, we are active. I mean, we all, the Yemenis and Egyptian also do act. And that made us know a lot of people. And frankly, through Twitter now, every country I go, I made friends. And this is something unbelievable. I'm number 4th now in the Arab region in Twitter. And I'm number 1 in my country. And this is only less than 1 year. Work of less than 1 year. And I'm happy to know all these people. I mean, I consider every member of behind me is a friend of mine. Go ahead.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, so I want to go around and take a few questions and then give the panelists one final chance to respond. So we'll start down here with the gentleman. Actually, behind you, the gentleman against the whiteboard there. All the way down here.
Hi again. My name's Zach Ritter, and I'm at Georgetown University. I don't want to play the pessimist here, but I think someone needs to be playing the role of a pessimist in these discussions. My main question is whether the United States not only will play a role right now, but whether it has the fortitude, the political capital to stay there and see this through. The European Union was able to do that. And it was a very tumultuous time in Eastern Europe. You had Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, which seemed that they were going towards democracy, but this was not the case in, for instance, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria had many difficulties. And only through EU conditionality and a huge carrot were they able to make the successful transition to become liberal democracies. And liberal is important here. Because if you believe in the democratic peace, which seems like that's a widely held belief here, that's only true for liberal democracies. The most warlike societies are the ones that are transitioning. And so my question is, do we have the political capital? I don't think we do. And does the EU? I'm not sure. I don't think so either. So that's my pessimistic view.
Thank you. Yeah, pass it right to the gentleman there. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Dave Rabinowitz. Democracy is more than just elections. Democracy is a culture. Freedom of speech is worthless if people don't speak. And one of the major determinants of culture is what people see, the stories and the characters they see on popular television, particularly dramas, soap operas, comedies, and such. And I'm wondering, what are people seeing in Bahrain right now? Is it the kind of thing that's going to lead to a meaningful democracy?
Thank you. Pass the microphone down to the gentleman, yes, all the way, who's been patiently waiting.
Hi, my name's Mark Hankin. I work with the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center. And I'd like to address this to Nabeel. We've talked about political discrimination. We've talked about political power sharing. But I'd like you to focus on the resistance to change by a Sunni elite or a government elite that has really raped the nation when it comes to economic gain sharing, and how that factors into the resistance of change by people that are closely associated with the ruling family.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Was there anybody on the lady there in the center?
Thank you. Roda Septilisi, Romanian American. Comment and question is very simple. How can anything change in Bahrain unless something changes in Saudi?
Thank you. And we'll go to just pass the microphone to the gentleman right there, and then we'll take this gentleman. That'll be the last one.
I'm Gareth Ristika, and my question pretty much is, I'm not too familiar with the power relationship between the king of Bahrain and the prime minister, but is there a possibility that the king is worried that if he was to replace the prime minister with somebody who's more moderate and willing to negotiate and have more reforms, that the Saudi Arabia might do something drastic like bring in the troops or something else like that to make Bahrain its puppet state. Well,
thank you. And the gentleman up front here, just pass the microphone down, please. Right. Final question.
Thank you. Benjamin Tour, retired U.S. diplomat. How do you see the prospects, apart from U.S. interests and preferences, for a regional solution to the situation in Bahrain? That is, a solution that would involve the heavyweights in the region to come up with a solution, endorse it, and guarantee it, that would give confidence to minorities such as the Sunni minority in Bahrain. That would include Iran, of course.
Thank you. Nabeel?
No, I mean, I don't know about that, but I'm accepting it's different approach and culture. I don't use in my language Sunni minority and Shia, because it is the fight we have is not about religion, it's not about sect, it's about right, about justice, about liberty, about freedom. It got nothing to do, and we do fight for that, for everybody, for migrant workers, for Bahraini Shias, for Bahraini Sunni. So that is the standard we're talking about. The standard and criteria is international criteria, international standard, international convention and treaties for human rights. So that's why I always avoid saying Shias and Sunni, but I'm forced to repeat it. Other than saying Shia has been marginalized, yes, they are marginalized. Now, the gentleman here, I don't know about the TV, question, because what you see in TV, what we see in TV, because today is satellite and there are cables. But I can guarantee you nobody watch Bahrain TV. And yes, about Saudi, yes, we believe Saudi has to have, Saudi, one of the worst situation when it comes to human rights. But because of interest, complication and all that, people are quiet. Nobody talks about it because they own most of the media, they own most of the TV, they have a lot of money. But at least there are always nosy people like me who will travel all around the world to say what is the reality going in Saudi. And yes, we believe Saudi, they deserve to live in democracy. They believe the woman in Saudi, she deserves to drive a car. When they come to Bahrain, the Saudi woman, they drive better than the Saudi man. But when in Saudi, they don't allow them to. They deserve to have democracy. I don't believe that it started in Tunisia, which is smaller than Egypt, but it started the revolution and succeed. Then it's gone to the big country. It's not necessary that it has to start in Saudi. It could start anywhere.
Thank you. Tom?
I'll take the ones about pessimism. First of all, I think you're totally right, and it's totally irrelevant. As an analyst, you're absolutely right that the Eastern European countries had a great advantage because there was the magnet of EU membership and NATO membership, and we used that very, very effectively. In the Middle East, we don't have that, and we're not going to have that. But it's also, I think it would be a false statement to say that transitions to democracies in unstable societies are impossible without the magnet of EU membership, because we've seen them in other regions in the absence of that magnet. In Latin America and Indonesia, hopefully we're going to see one in Burma soon. All these situations are different. And so, we could write a research paper that says that, Czechoslovakia had an 80% chance of success because of the magnet, and Bahrain might have a 35% chance. So what? Our job is to raise 35 to 45 and do our best, right? In other words, the course of action we will take is going to be exactly the same, irregardless of the truth of what you just said. In terms of Saudi Arabia, I think we probably should have talked more about that. It was, I think, a big factor, I think, in U.S. thinking in the spring was not so much a desire to appease the Saudis, but a kind of a resigned sense that no matter what happened in Bahrain, the Saudis would come in the end and stop the process of reform. That would, the sort of relatively mild intervention that we saw would have been a much less mild intervention had the king actually ceded some of his powers and allowed a constitutional monarchy. And so what can we do, right? Either way, you lose. I can spin an argument which says that's true, and I can spin an argument which says that's not true. And I'm not sure which one is right. But again, I come down to the same point, which is, you got to try anyway. Is anyone in this room prepared to say to Nabeel, you should just stand down because in the end the Saudis are going to crush you anyway? Just give up, for goodness sakes. Don't you know you're going to lose? We actually don't know that, right? If anything, we've learned anything about the Middle East in the last year is that assumptions aren't always correct. And so this assumption, which is a reasonable assumption, may not be correct, and I think we need to act as if it's not correct.
Thank you. I'm reminded of the question that Oleg got last year by somebody in the audience who said, will Russia ever have democracy? And Oleg said, absolutely. So, Tom.
Well, very quickly, the question really was addressed to transitions, where we're addressing here is a pre-transitional situation. We got to get the breakthrough before we can deal with all the complexities that you're talking about. But I'd love to get there. On the issue of Saudi Arabia and the fear of Saudi Arabia, that's exactly what I was saying. In other words, I was very clear, but let me be explicit about it now, that only if the U.S. comes in to defend and give confidence to the elements in the government that are favorable to reform, only then will they be able to stand up to. They have to feel that somebody's covering their back. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. And that's what I was really asking for. So, yeah, Saudi Arabia will try to undercut it, and we should be prepared for that. But the U.S. is going to have to behave decisively in something like this. Finally, I liked what Nabeel said about Tunisia, because I totally reject the idea of going for a regional solution. The idea of getting Iran and Saudi Arabia into that roundtable that I talked about is an absolutely unthinkable idea. What I was saying was that the change in the Gulf is going to come from a small place outward, a little bit like Tunisia for the Middle East, a small country that started it all. Bahrain has the potential to do this. So the Gulf will change, and ultimately Iran is going to change because that regime is not long for this world, but it's going to change. The influence is going to come outward from if Bahrain could be successful in making this change. That's the way to change the region, because I don't think these constitutional monarchies, as I said, can withstand the historical forces that are at work in the region.
And that's what they're afraid of.
Yes, well.
Thank you. Wafa,
Yeah.
Final thoughts?
I want to, I hope that in the future in Bahrain, the question, what is your SACT, it's not acceptable, like United States, that it's not allowed and it's not acceptable to ask the people about their SACT or religion. And we hope that the Bahrain become the same model. It's not acceptable to ask the people about the religion. I hope that also Bahrain become a model, a liberal model. I mean, that we have a civil political society, not a sect or religious political society, and this will save the society from the conflict between to have a sectarian problem with the segments inside the society.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite all of you to continue the conversation upstairs, one floor up, during a little reception, but not without first congratulating Nabeel once more on his prize. And thanking our speakers for a very stimulating panel. And thank you all for joining us.